Can you think of any similarities between the borders of Africa and a kindergartner's finger painting? Both of them were drawn quickly and carelessly, making a mess that everyone else had to clean up.
Oh, that's a good one, matey. But in all seriousness, the issue of Africa's borders is a serious one, right?
That's right, Chrono. Africa's borders were drawn a long time ago, and the people that did it didn't do a particularly good job of it. And just like anything that's done poorly, it's caused a lot of problems for the people involved.
That sounds like a story with a little bit of mess.
You're right, it is a mess, my hooting mate. The history of Africa's borders is fraught with problems. It's disrupted the lives of a lot of people and hampered progress across the continent. Even though things are chaotic, they're not hopeless. If we want to know how Africa can fix its border problems, we need to know what the problem is, where it came from, and how it's affecting the continent. Africa's modern borders were established during the era of colonization. The borders were drawn to please the people in power, with no regard given to the people who lived in those areas. The European powers just said, to hell with the various ethnic groups and their respective cultures and differences. Let's just divide up this continent according to our needs. And that's exactly what happened.
Well, shiver me timbers, matey. A bunch of white dudes opened the map of Africa and said, this is Egypt and this is Nigeria. Alright, have fun and call it a day? But hey, what do I know? I'm just a pirate.
You're not far off, Chrono. Almost immediately, Europeans drew lines in the sand that effectively partitioned African communities into separate areas. This factored into the breaking down of many groups, including families and tribes. One of the biggest ones is trade conflicts. You see, these dummies cut off various trade routes without considering the repercussions. It doesn't take an economist to figure out that this had a devastating effect on the continent's economy.
Avast you mateys, ye be speaking the truth. These borders were an absolute blunder of epic proportions. For the people of Africa, it'd be a rough ride ahead. Let's hope they can find their way to smoother seas soon.
The bad news, my friend, is that it only gets worse. These borders have caused more friction than slamming the brakes on an F1 car. This is because the colonizers' primary motivation for drawing the borders was to maximize their own power and influence. European colonizers started making borders in Africa during the late 19th century, notably after the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, when European powers bargained and consented to regulations for the colonization and division of Africa. The borders were drawn to suit the welfare of the colonizers, without respect or regard for existing cultural or ethnic boundaries. Belgium, under the image of humanitarianism, used its colonization of the Congo to exploit its resources. Germany, a fairly novel colonial regime, aimed to launch its empire and contend with other European nations. Britain looked to capture control of trade routes, while France was hell-bent on maintaining its international power and circulating its language and culture. Portugal, already having colonies based in Africa, concentrated on retaining the authority of its existing colonies and growing its influence. The motivations of the European colonizers were based on imperialism, capitalism, and the hunger for control. The majority of African nations acquired autonomy from the European colonizers in the 1950s and 1960s, with some nations like Algeria gaining independence later. However, the borders had been drawn and the damage had already been done. Because of this, the disruption of resources was careless at best and disastrous if we're completely honest.
Them white suits sailing in on their fancy ships, looting and pillaging all the riches they could find, and then skedaddling when the going gets tough. It'd be a tale as old as the seas, that be for sure.
Yeah, I know, right? What an unbelievably foreign concept.
You be talking about any current troubles caused by them borders, eh?
Oh, we'd have to start a whole other channel and hire your brother to be the mascot there if we wanted to discuss all the conflicts. But to just give you an illustration, consider the problem of the border between Sudan and South Sudan. This border, like all the others, was drawn without considering the impact on the various peoples already living in the area.
Aye, what happened then?
When Sudan got its independence on January 1st of 1956, the government was dominated by Arab Muslims. People in the south began to feel oppressed. As a result, many in South Sudan turned to violence, and the Sudan People's Liberation Army, or SPLA, was founded on May 16th of 1983. They took up a desperate struggle for freedom. The Sudanese conflict that led to the country being split in half was sparked by the ambitions of a few powerful men to amass even more wealth and influence. The South Sudan dispute has interrupted the production of oil, causing economic instability and reduced government earnings, negatively affecting the provision of even the most basic of services. Millions have been left without access to education, job opportunities, and healthcare. The dispute also has international importance, potentially disrupting global commerce, leading to a refugee emergency, and influencing local and international peace. Though there have been efforts to find a solution, an agreement is yet to be reached. The Sudan dispute, it's like the Real Housewives but with more guns. That's our next video.
Blimey, matey. You be talking about something truly crazy, eh?
Crazy doesn't even begin to cover it. It's only one of hundreds of wars that these borders have sparked. What's worse is that these borders aren't in accordance with the ethnicities of the people living there. There are many different ethnic and linguistic communities spread across Africa. It's clear that these borders didn't consider these distinctions, and that's why they've been fighting ever since.
Aye, these losers didn't even consider the culture of the people in the areas they were drawing borders for. The more I hear about them, the worse these lots sound.
Exactly, Chrono. These borders are at the heart of what ails the Democratic Republic of the Congo, a country riven by violence and instability. The dispute in the Democratic Republic of Congo, or the DRC, has been raging since the 1990s, with multiple armed parties struggling for authority over the country's extensive mineral resources. The Western Sahara conflict is another that's been going on for decades, resulting in the abuse of human rights and restricted economic development. Likewise, Somaliland has encountered conflict and territorial conflicts since it attained sovereignty in 1991. These disputes have had lasting impacts on the social and economic development of Africa.
Army matey, ye be talking about the age-old problem of countries fighting like a pack of sea dogs over their differences, eh? It'd be a shame, really. If only they could sit down like civilized pirates and sort out their booty, their issues, with a friendly game of cards or something.
We all wish that, my friend, but life isn't that simple. But you know, as bad as everything is, there is a solution to this madness.
Aye, ye scurvy dog. Ye be talking about something that sounds as mysterious as a mermaid, eh?
Just change the lines on the map, as the saying goes. For the reason that redrawing these lines won't be easy. This is because even if African leaders approve of the idea, they'll still have to deal with the highly political task of allocating resources among countries and determining how to best meet the needs of the citizens.
Army matey, ye be talking about one of them unclimbable mountains, eh?
Of course it won't be simple, but it's certainly not out of the question. Naturally, this would call for unprecedented cooperation among African countries. Also, it would require all the countries involved to make huge sacrifices. But the potential benefits of redrawing the borders so that they match the ethnicities of the people who live in the countries are enough to get the African leaders to put aside their differences and work together on this. All of Africa could benefit economically from greater stability and unity if its borders were improved.
Ahoy there, matey. Ye be bringing up a serious matter indeed. The capitalists also be praising capitalism like a bunch of parrots. But when the going got tough in 2008, they flew the coop faster than a seagull with stolen loot. Aye, what are these actual solutions?
The thing is, there are a few approaches to this. One of the simplest is to simply redraw the borders to reflect the actual cultural and social relationships that existed between the various African tribes throughout history. This approach would consider the needs of the people who live in these areas and would bring peace and stability to all of Africa. Other factors that should be taken into consideration when drawing new borders is the geography of Africa before the colonizers took over. The religions of the people living there can also be an effective gauge as to how to draw new borders that would promote peace among people.
Aye, that sounds like the opening of a Pandora's box, but all the evils are just more conflicts.
It's possible, though, that changing the borders would spark new wars. Keep in mind, though, that the current borders were not established with the needs and desires of the African people living in these countries in mind. Conflict is possible in the short term, but in the long run, Africa as a whole will benefit economically from this.
Ye be speaking my language now. If these countries be wanting to put in the effort, they'll need to be more organized. How will they get this done?
The quick answer is a lot of communication, cooperation, and understanding among African countries and their leaders. It's not going to happen in a day. On the other hand, things could turn out well for Africa if the leaders of the various African nations did get together and make an effort to work for the common good of their countries.
Oh, matey, that sounds like a challenge. I hope they're up for it.
Me too, buddy. Me too. Since the problem of Africa's borders is so intricate, it needs to be addressed not only by African leaders, but by the international community as a whole. Colonialism has left Africa in shambles, spawning wars and spreading instability across the continent. Many African countries preserve close associations with their former colonizers, leading to them having persistent sway over African affairs. Former colonial powers frequently sustain monetary and military ties. Although there are advantages to these connections, others claim that they can lead to neo-colonialism and modern-day exploitation of African resources, restricting African nations from completely proclaiming their autonomy. The influence of former colonizers on African matters remains a subject of controversy. Even so, the redefinition of Africa's borders presents a once-in-a-generation chance for the African people to rethink not only their identities, but also their place in the world. So the question is, are the leaders of African countries able to put aside their differences and work together to provide appropriate borders? Or will their differences, their conflicts, and their instability win out in the end? The only thing that can tell us for sure is the passage of time, and all we can do is hope for the best.